I tell you, it looks beautiful going away, and it's going to look even better coming back.
They have weapons of mass destruction. That is what this war was about. You've heard the president say repeatedly that he has chemical and biological weapons.
That Saddam Hussein still has chemical and biological weapons, and he is moving ever closer to developing a nuclear weapon. Iraq has a growing fleet of manned and unmanned aerial vehicles, high-strength aluminum tubes suitable for nuclear weapons production. Thousands of tons of chemical agents, 500 tons of sarin, mustard, and VX nerve agent, continues to possess and conceal some of the most lethal weapons ever devised. The British government has learned that Saddam Hussein recently sought significant quantities of uranium from Africa.
There is no doubt that Saddam Hussein now has weapons of mass destruction.
They have weapons of mass destruction. That is what this war was about.
There is no doubt that he is amassing them to use against our friends, against our allies, and against us.
Saddam Hussein is a homicidal dictator who is addicted to weapons of mass destruction.
They have weapons of mass destruction. That is what this war was about.
Where are Saddam Hussein's weapons of mass destruction?
Former Chief Weapons Inspector David Kay said last week, quote, "We were all wrong about Saddam's WMD."
By now, the world knows there was a massive intelligence failure in the war on Iraq. President Bush and other countries.
The failure to find Saddam Hussein's alleged weapons of mass destruction has raised serious questions about the legitimacy and legality of the ongoing war in Iraq. But as both American and Iraqi casualties escalate, and as the conflict becomes more chaotic and deadly by the day, debate within the United States continues to focus narrowly on whether American intelligence agencies provided accurate enough information to justify going to war. In the process, a larger question has been all but ignored. If the war was not about weapons of mass destruction, what is it really about?
I keep asking the questions of why and how. Does this incident even have a purpose?
Of self-identified radical conservatives at the right-wing extreme of the Republican Party, a group of intellectuals and policymakers who saw the fall of the Soviet Union and communism not as an opportunity to scale back America's Cold War military machine, but as an opportunity to build up its size and scale, to use military force more aggressively and unilaterally, to construct a new, unchallenged American empire.
is this kind of ideology that has grown up in the wake of the Cold War, propounded quite openly by what we are calling neoconservatives in America.
So this is not just a Republican takeover. This is a very specific wing of the Republican Party. It's neoconservative, it's unilateralist, it doesn't believe in the rule of law, it doesn't believe you have to tell the public the truth.
And they happen to be an extremely arrogant, dangerous group of reactionary statists. They're not conservatives.
They have a political agenda with regards to foreign policy that they had been working on for years and years, and writing about this and saying this is the post-Cold War vision. This is our post-Cold War vision for American power.
Ever since the Cold War ended, there were people who were fuming on the right, thinking this is the golden opportunity now that Russia's out of the way for America to take over the world. We're not doing anything about it. Those damn liberals, those softheads, are keeping us from doing what is our godly mission.
A radical plan for American military domination first surfaced during the administration of George H.W. Bush. In 1992, Paul Wolfowitz, working in the Department of Defense, was asked to write the first draft of a new national security strategy, a document entitled the Defense Planning Guidance. The most controversial elements of what would later come to be known as the Wolfowitz Doctrine were that the United States should dramatically increase defense spending, that it should be willing to take preemptive military action, and that it should be willing to use military force unilaterally, with or without allies. This new reliance on military force was necessary, according to Wolfowitz, to prevent the emergence of any future or potential rivals to American power, and to secure access to vital resources, especially Persian Gulf oil. In 2000, they would craft yet another proposed national security strategy, this one published by a right-wing think tank calling itself the Project for the New American Century. At its core, the document revived the Wolfowitz Doctrine. It called on the United States to increase the military budget by up to $100 billion, to deny other nations the use of outer space, and to adopt a more aggressive and unilateral foreign policy that would allow the United States to act offensively and preemptively in the world. The elimination of states like Iraq figured prominently in this grand vision.
This drive is now led by the weapons manufacturers themselves. It is a highly dangerous precedent. I call it war corporatism. It is the door of a new fascism being pushed open. And don't be fooled, not all fascism looks like Adolf Hitler. The reality, as we see from the Iraqi invasion, is that the presidency has been captured by the most powerful elements of this corporatism. And this ghastly molecule aims to turn the world into its very own enslaved global market, and the plan is well underway. The attack by Al-Qaeda on the World Trade Center is just one response to it. Is this a conspiracy? Quite the opposite. It is a high-profile project known as the Project for the New American Century. People like Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld, Richard Pearl are the major players among politicians, right-wing thinkers, militarists and industrialists in the creation of the project. The project is a neoconservative manifesto which includes in its toolbox the unbridled use of war in clearing a path for US interests. The will to attack Iraq came entirely from this visible yet sinister group. September the 11th was merely the pretext. Bush is merely the figurehead.
And so, in their defining document, written in September of 2000, a full year before 9/11, they acknowledge that the process of transformation, even if it brings revolutionary change, is likely to be a long one. Absent, in their own chilling words, some catastrophic and catalyzing event, like a new Pearl Harbor. 1 year later, that event would arrive.
The reality, as we see from the Iraqi invasion, is that the presidency is what this war was about. And this ghastly molecule aims to turn the world into its very own enslaved global market, and the plan is well underway. the attack by Al Qaeda on the World Trade Center is just one response to it.
People just took off. People ducked into doorways.
Is this a conspiracy? Quite the opposite. It's a high-profile project known as the Project for the New American Century. People like Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld, Richard Pearl are the major players among politicians, right-wing thinkers, militarists, and industrialists in the creation of the project. The project is a neoconservative manifesto which includes in its toolbox the unbridled use of war in clearing a path for US interests. The will to attack Iraq came entirely from this visible yet sinister group. September the 11th was merely the pretext.
I understand that they want the American public to believe that the invasion of Iraq was the response to September 11th. I think it is a lie. I believe that it is part of a neoconservative agenda to assert that American hegemony is untouchable. And September 11th gave them the opportunity to put in play plans that they had been considering since the first Bush administration.
In all of its previous incarnations, and long before 9/11 and the current war on terror, the Wolfowitz Doctrine had identified regime change in Iraq as a crucial first step toward global domination by force. In a widely circulated letter to President Bill Clinton in 1998, the members of the Project for the New American Century challenged the president to act forcefully and militarily to remove Saddam Hussein from power. 2 years later, George W. Bush would handpick many of these same neoconservatives for key foreign policy posts in the Pentagon and State Department. Once installed in government positions, as recent interviews with a number of former members of the Bush administration have revealed, the group maintained its long-standing focus on Iraq, a focus that intensified after the attacks of September 11.
In the meetings of the inner sanctum of the Bush administration, the attack on Iraq was brought up from almost the first days, even though there was no evidence whatever that the Iraqis had been involved in this.
The president dragged me into a room with a couple of other people, shut the door, and said, I want you to find whether Iraq did this. That George Bush wanted me to come back with a report that said Iraq did this.
From the very beginning, there was a conviction that Saddam Hussein was a bad person and that he needed to go.
Just 5 hours after American Airlines Flight 77 struck the Pentagon, and without any evidence linking Saddam Hussein to the attacks of 9/11, Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld was already ordering his aides to draw up plans for striking Iraq. The notes quote Rumsfeld as saying he wanted best info fast, judge whether good enough hit SH, meaning Saddam Hussein. Go massive, Rumsfeld continued in the notes. Sweep it all up, things related and not.
After 9/11, we have a very clear experience of what terrorism is, and people should feel afraid. The question is, what policies will make us more safe? So the fear is legitimate, but it is manipulated, and that's the core of the Bush policy, to manipulate that fear.
There will be no going back to the era before September the 11th, 2001, to false comfort in a dangerous world.
The problem for the Bush administration is that plans that already existed for regime change in Iraq had to be justified. They couldn't just go in without public support. The public support was created by connecting Saddam Hussein to those fears of terrorism. The fear generated by 9/11, the fear of terrorist networks, has to be transferred to Iraq. That is, the American people have to learn to be as afraid of Saddam Hussein as they are of Osama bin Laden.
We've had no evidence that Saddam Hussein was involved with the September the 11th.
And the idea is, if you want to have real leverage or control in the future global economy, if you can sit back and control the tap for natural gas mostly and oil secondly, but very importantly, that will give you enormous strategic power in the world.
This is an impressive crowd, the haves and the have-mores. Some people call you the elite. I call you my base. All nations to do everything they can to stop these terrorist killers. Thank you.
Now watch this drive.
We just pulled out here yesterday just to come out and help protect the oil line.
In a tank?
In a tank.
And what did we see in the aftermath of September 11, 2001? Immediate action on all fronts. The Patriot Act was passed here in the United States without public debate, without any debate by Congress, just passed. It's a frontal assault on the Constitution.
Attorney General Ashcroft moved aggressively after the attacks, expanding the executive branch's legal authority.
Our assault on terror, our war on terror, allows us to justify and legitimate a whole bunch of things that I think are pretty scary and frightening.
They can come into your home or my home, plant listening devices, take documents, photograph documents, tap the phone, and not tell you about it, and get away with it.
Right now, as we talk, the Fourth and Sixth Amendments to the Constitution, to the Bill of Rights, are dead letters.
The more we're afraid, the more you ask us to give. Patriot Act 2, enhancements to the Patriot Act. Now the budget's starting to be bankrupted. Billions flowing out of this country into a war on terror, more defense expenditure.
I'm a war president. I make decisions here in the Oval Office in foreign policy matters with war on my mind.
One of the most important roles of the news media is to make sure the American public never sees the effects of war. So we see the tanks from which the shells are fired. We see the soldiers firing those shells. We don't see the people killed and maimed by those shells. The American public has received a very one-sided view of war.
I, for one, don't think that we should censor photographs of people who are wounded or dead. I think we should see them in living color every single night. Now they hide behind it, well, that's, that would be insensitive and all that stuff.
Some of it, after careful thought and trying to be responsible as well as sensitive, we have electronically blurred.
Well, of course it'd be insensitive. And people need to be sensitized to what's really going on.
I'm an American first and foremost. I love my country more than anything. I'm willing to die for my country. I'm like George W. Bush, our president, Mr. Chicken Hawk, a guy who couldn't even have the courage to see through his tour of duty in the Air National Guard. Maybe flying F-102s over Houston, Texas was too dangerous, so he ran off to Alabama while millions of Americans were going to Vietnam. And he has an administration chock full of these so-called heroes, people who didn't have the courage to defend their country in a time of unpopular war, and yet today they've got us engaged in another unpopular war, and they're asking other people to go out there and do things.
We call them chicken hawks because none of them served in the military. They didn't wear a uniform. They all had other things to do. None of their children serve in the military. So this is a double chicken hawk whammy here because, George Bush's daughters don't wear a uniform. It's funny, he says, my daughter's the same age as Jessica Lynch. Yeah, but there's a big difference. Jessica Lynch wore a uniform and did what you guys told him to do.
You say you're the leader of the free world because you have military experience, and we find out you've been AWOL. You didn't really show up. There are holes even in the stories you put forth in the media now to suggest I was there. Look, I have memories of it. I remember that I was there.
There isn't anyone who can stand up and say, I served with George W. Bush.
These records ought to have been noted by his commanding officers.
Some of his officers don't recall ever seeing him.
That's a simple question. How about a simple answer?
Bush was a draft dodger. Not only that, he was AWOL. In fact, he was a deserter because this is longer than 30 days. You're a deserter. The guy was actually a deserter in wartime. If it had been Clinton, they would have just crucified him on the White House lawn.
I was in Iraq when George Bush made the comment when he was talking about Iraqi attacks on U.S. soldiers, and he said, bring them on.
There are some who feel like that, the conditions are such that they can attack us there. My answer is bring them on.
And you should have seen the reaction among the troops when they heard that. They started saying, bring on the attacks. We're the ones who are out here on the streets doing patrol that are the targets. How could he be saying that? This can only be coming from people who never fought. He can dress himself up all he wants in this military gear and show up on aircrafts and present himself with a turkey in front of the troops. This guy never fought a war.
He's not qualified to speak of himself as macho, but he's shrewd enough to know that those working males out there are very angry, and that if he presents himself as macho, as he did, of course, with that ridiculous flight,
they have weapons of mass destruction.
That fast plane to land on the carrier. in full combat gear. If he presents himself that way, they'll buy it. They'll buy it because they need it.
On his visit to Ground Zero a few days after the catastrophe, he took the bullhorn and stood alongside some of the rescue workers and basically did the one thing he has always been undeniably good at, which is cheerleading. He was a cheerleader at Phillips Andover, actually, and very good at it. But this is the culture of TV, where the press really only cares about and only responds to televisual performance. And at a moment where everybody wanted a big daddy, Bush did well enough to allow the press to marvel at his aplomb, at his stature, and it became a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy.
If I had a little window into the average American household, you know, like 5 minutes on their TV screen at night, to tell them how to decode the kind of propaganda they're going to see from President Bush about security, I think, you know, I would say, first of all, don't just look at the images. Don't just look at Bush landing on the aircraft carrier, Bush surrounding himself with our troops.
Hooah! Semper Fi.
They want him to look tough. They want him to look strong. In fact, even on Earth Day, you know, the image they chose was him with an axe in his hand, clearing trails in the Adirondacks. So, you know, his administration is so dripping with testosterone that even to celebrate Earth Day, the guy's got to have a weapon in his hand.
They lose no opportunity to take pictures of Bush on the ranch, outdoors, not sitting at a desk, you know, wearing, you know, reading glasses and having, you know, intellectual conversations, but out walking, clearing brush, sitting on the back of a pickup truck. Those images are plentiful, and that's not an accident. That's how they've understood Bush's popularity, is he is the rugged individualist. He is the cowboy.
The Republicans have ingeniously, created this sense that this is about real men. It's time for real men to step to the plate. Now, enough of this namby-pamby, because George W. represents the reborn American male.
Bush's propagandists have been masterful at crafting a certain image for him, actually based to some extent on his weaknesses. He's not a guy who was born in Connecticut and was a legacy admission to Phillips Andover and Yale. He's not a guy who has the Queen of England as a cousin, you know. He's not a guy from a fabulously wealthy family. None of that is the case. He's just Will Rogers. He's just a regular guy, and when he messes up the language, it proves he's just like you and me.
I understand the emotionality of the death penalty.
U.S. Daily's story about subliminal messages.
Reduced power plant emissions. First time we may be completely certain he has a nuclear weapons.
Some accuse us both of not being able to speak the language.
That's quite brilliant, you know, is to make Bush out to be a kind of Jacksonian figure, kind of natural leader from the wilds, you know.
President Bush and his colleagues talk about a certain America to defend their policies. They think America still is back in the 19th century, where the tough guys can take out one another in an open combat, man against man, high noon on Main Street with Gary Cooper, being played by President Bush.
I want him held. I want justice. And there's an old poster out west, as I recall, that said "Wanted, dead or alive."
He's not Gary Cooper. He's a coward who bushwhacked the American people by exploiting the fear and ignorance engendered in the post-9/11 environment to portray Iraq as a threat to our national security, weapons of mass destruction that would destroy the very society that we live in. The need, therefore, for frontier justice to prevent mushroom clouds from popping up all over American cities. He lied to us. He bushwhacked us.
You know, you think of past elections, Michael Dukakis, you think of him riding around in the tank looking like Snoopy, you know. You think of the Willie Horton ad against him. You know, you don't really think of substantive things because our elections rarely turn anymore on substantive issues. But this is one that really needs to be decided on the substance because our country faces real threats. But these guys are not going after the right threats. They are pursuing a pre-existing agenda under the guise of fighting terrorism that is going to bankrupt our country, that is going to put our troops at risk, and that is going to make the terrorist threat to us grow over time instead of diminish.
I found it odd in the build-up to the war that the media would portray your ideal patriot either as the service member away from home or somebody on the street corner waving a flag and shouting, "We support the troops." I can train a monkey to wave a flag. That does not make the monkey patriotic. I can't train a monkey to read the Constitution or live the Constitution. You know, on the other opposite end of that street was another group of Americans who also had the American flag, who said support the troops, but bring them home. Those are patriots too. I think we have to understand that the definition of patriotism cannot be hijacked by people with a specific ideological agenda.
American citizens after 9/11 said to the president, what can we do? What can we do to become engaged and take some responsibility? President Bush unfortunately said, go shopping. Go back to the mall. Go back to your normal lives. We'll take care of it. Spectatorship is an invitation to fear. Citizenship is how we fight the politics of fear. The politics of citizenship, the politics of engagement, taking responsibility is a much better way to deal with terrorism than hunkering down, being spectators, and allowing the government to rob us of our liberties, to rob us of our multiculturalism in the name of protecting us.
And that's their project, is to make us scared and stupid. And see, my problem is, I've been to Washington, D.C. and stood in the middle of the night out in the Jefferson Memorial and read the inscriptions of Jefferson's quotes that are hammered into the marble. And you look up inside the rotunda, the favored quote at the highest point of the building. You have to turn around backwards to read it. He says, "On the altar of God, I pledge undying hostility to any government restriction on the free minds of the people." We were the first nation state to establish the principle that sovereignty, ultimate political power, resides in the people. That's a fundamentally radical concept, and these guys don't like the implications of it for their maintenance of minority wealth and power, and they're out to destroy that. But they will fail. I guarantee you they will fail.
Seen many of the managed demolitions where they implode a building and they cause it essentially to fall vertically because they cause all of the vertical columns to fail simultaneously. That's exactly what it looked like, and that's what happened.
It was live on television. I mean, just literally millions of people.
The entire building has just collapsed, as if a demolition team set off. When you see the old demolitions of these old buildings, it folded down on itself, and it is not...
10 o'clock Eastern Time this morning, just collapsing on itself. This is a place where thousands of people work. We have no idea what caused this. If you wish to bring anybody who's ever watched a building being demolished on purpose, know that if you're going to do this, you have to get at the under infrastructure of a building and bring it down.
At 10:30, I tried to
leave the building, but as soon as I got outside, I heard a second explosion, and another rumble, and more smoke, and more dust. I ran inside buildings, the chandelier took, and again, black smoke filled the air. Within another 5 minutes, we were covered again with more silk and more dust. And then a fire marshal came in and said we had to leave because if there was a third explosion, this building might not last.
As we were getting our gear on and making our way to the stairway, there was a heavy-duty explosion.
Some of the people out, then there was secondary explosions, and then the subsequent collapses. So I don't know how many people were in there. I know there was a lot of firefighters.
New York's bravest never had a chance.
We really never even got to that close to the building. An explosion blew and it knocked everybody over.
The FBI is here, as you can see. They had roped this area off. They were taking photographs and securing this area just prior to that huge explosion that we all heard and felt.
Most of the victims so far were people outside the blown-up buildings.
Like, it sounded like gunfire, you know, bang, 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 and then all of a sudden, 3 big explosions.
To me, it sounded like an explosion. Then the building, the rolling sound sounded like the building collapsed.
The floors collapsed down.
Aims to turn the world into its very own enslaved global market, and the plan is well underway.
69.
The attack.
It just went ba-boom. It was like a bomb went off, and it was like holy hell coming down them stairs. And then when we finally got to the bottom, they were coming out on the mezzanine level there, and another explosion came right on me because everyone was flying.
We just saw that as well. The second tower, the only one that was standing, tower number 1. Just we saw some kind of explosion, a lot of smoke come out of the top of the tower, and then it collapsed down onto the street.
We know it was boom, the floor started shaking. And then we saw debris fall down, and next thing we know, we had to get out of the building. We stuck on the stairs for a while. We finally got down to the lobby. Then we get to the lobby, it was this big explosion.
Well, me and Mr. Hess, the corporation council, were on the 23rd floor. I told him we got to get out of here. We started walking down the stairs and made to the 8th floor. Big explosion. Blew us back into the 8th floor.
I was making my way to the foot of
And the plan is well underway.
Suddenly, while talking
The
to an
attack.
officer was questioning me about my press credentials, we heard a very loud blast, an explosion. We looked up, and the building literally began to collapse.
Rose Archie, one of our CNN producers, is on the call and Rose. What do you got?
I'm about a block away, and there were several people that were hanging out the windows right below where the plane crashed, when suddenly you saw the top of the building start to shake, and people began leaping from the windows in the north side of the building. You saw 2 people at first plummet, and then a third one, and then the entire top of the building just blew up, and splinters of debris are falling on the street. When I tried to save people, in a moment we heard a big explosion coming down. Everything just went black. Everything came down, glass started popping. People got hurt, stuff went on top of them.
And this ghastly molecule.
It was a big explosion, and everything got dark, real dark, like snow. You can see behind me, this is not snow, this is all from the building. It was a terrible nightmare.
Because I was down in the basement, all of a sudden we heard a loud bang, and the elevator doors blew open. Some guy was burnt up, so I dragged him out. His skin was all hanging off.
The streets of the financial district covered with debris, in some cases ankle deep. Cars on fire, cars just turned by the force of the explosions. It was like something no one had ever seen.
It was huge, incredible force of wind and debris that came up the stairs, knocked my helmet off, knocked me to the ground.
I was about 5 blocks away when I heard explosions, 3 thuds, and turned around to see the building we just got out of. Antenna tip over and fall in on itself.
We started floor by floor, it started popping out.
It was if they had detonated.
Yeah, detonated.
Planned to take down a building. Boom, 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 boom.
I go downstairs, the foreman tells me to go to remove the containers. As I'm walking by the main freight car of the building, in the corridor, that's when I got blown. I mean, the impact of the explosion, of whatever happened, threw me to the floor, and that's when everything started happening.
You have 210-story office buildings. You don't find a desk. You don't find a chair. You don't find a telephone, a computer. The biggest piece of a telephone I found was half of the keypad, and it was about this big. The building collapsed to dust.
That was about an hour ago, not even.
It's absolutely.
Look at that. That's all that's left.
Yeah, and it's just gouged. Like the parts of the Twin Towers are just gouged out. The building. See, that's the concourse below. That's going down like 20 feet.
The plan is well underway.
And you can see the two towers. A huge explosion now, raining debris on all of us. We better get out of the way.
The reality, as we see from the Iraqi invasion, is that the presidency has been captured by the most powerful elements of this corporatism. And this ghastly molecule aims to turn the world into its very own enslaved global market, and the plan is well underway.
And when you're running like that, just in fear for your life, you have no idea how close that is behind you.
Not all fascism looks like Adolf Hitler.
And it's just coming from every street. Look at that.
There has just been a huge explosion. We can see a billowing smoke rising. And I'll tell you that I can't see that second tower, but there was a cascade of sparks and fire, and now it looks almost like a mushroom cloud explosion, this huge billowing smoke in the second tower. This was the second of the two towers hit. And I cannot see behind that smoke, obviously, as you can't either. The first tower in front has not changed. And we see this extraordinarily and frightening scene behind us of this second tower, now just encased in smoke. What is behind it, I cannot tell you.
The second building that was hit by the plane has just completely collapsed. The entire building has just collapsed, as if a demolition team set off. When you see the old demolitions of these old buildings, it folded down on itself, and it is not there anymore.
That should be it.
It has completely collapsed.
The whole side has collapsed?
The whole building has collapsed.
The whole building has collapsed?
The building has collapsed.
Appearing to fall away from the rest of the building. Can we go to the tape now? Here we go, right here. This is, I mean, when you look at it, the building has collapsed. That tower just came down.
Not all fascism looks like Adolf Hitler. The reality, as we see from the Iraqi invasion, is that the presidency has been captured by the most
spoke to the chief of safety for the New York City Fire Department. He received word of the possibility of a secondary device, that is another bomb going off. He thinks that there were actually devices that were planted in the building.
Over an hour. I want to underscore again that both towers have been hit.
And this
both towers. Each tower was hit by an aircraft
global market, and
that there have been attacks in two American cities, New York and in Washington. The trade centers here in New York have been hit by airplanes. In Washington, there is a large fire at the Pentagon. The Pentagon has been evacuated. And there's, you can see, perhaps the second tower, the front tower, the top portion of which is collapsing.
Is that the presidency has been captured by the most powerful elements.
Good Lord. There are no words. You can see large pieces of the building falling. You can see the smoke rising. You can see a portion of the side of the building now just being covered on the right side as I look at it, covered in smoke. This is just a horrific scene and a horrific moment.
Has been captured by the most powerful elements. And this ghastly molecule aims to turn the world into its very own enslaved global market, and the plan is well underway. The attack down now. Fascism looks like Adolf Hitler. The reality, as we see from the Iraqi invasion, is that the presidency has been captured.
Oh my God.
There it is. And this ghastly molecule aims to turn the world into its very own enslaved global market, and the plan is well underway. The attack is the door of a new fascism.
That's a videotape replay.
And don't be fooled. Not all fascism looks like Adolf
we're trapped by this, and here is the second tower that's coming down, and this was a similar situation. This defies belief.
Again, what you're seeing are high shots. Now, here we're going to show you a videotape of the collapse itself.
Describe that.
Now we go to videotape, the collapse of this building.
Is the door of a new fascism being pushed open? Don't be fooled. Not all fascism looks like Adolf Hitler.
It's amazing. Amazing, incredible, pick your word. For the third time today, it's reminiscent of those pictures we've all seen too much on television before, when a building was deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down.
It's gone, man. Not all fascism looks like Adolf Hitler.
Back live, we have had little relief here. Take a look at this. About an hour ago, World Trade Center building number 7 collapsed. A 42-story building. No word of any casualties in the building. It was the one calamity that was not a surprise.
I remember getting a call from the fire department commander telling me that they were not sure they were going to be able to contain the fire. I said, you know, we've had such terrible losses of life. Maybe the smartest thing to do is pull it. And they made that decision to pull, and then we watched the building collapse.
Stunning statements from the BYU professor tonight regarding 9/11. He thinks planes alone did not bring down the World Trade Center towers. Both towers collapsed in place after terrorist attacks. Later that day, World Trade number 7, which was never hit by a plane, fell in less than 7 seconds. I'm Lady spoke to the professor today, joins us from the roof of the Wells Fargo Center. A crazy theory, Brian, or any validity to this?
Well, Professor Stephen Jones got an email today asking, are you some kind of nutcase? And actually, he's written an academic paper for peer review. It's been well received, he says, among his colleagues at BYU, and it's essentially this. The buildings fell on September 11th, not from planes, but from explosives that were intentionally set.
And this ghastly molecule aims to turn the world into its very own enslaved global market, and the plan is well underway. The attack is the door of a new fascism being pushed open. And don't be fooled, not all fascism looks like Adolf Hitler.
Stephen Jones says, not so fast.
They're sticking with this one hypothesis. It's almost they have blinders on. It's got to be fires and damage.
Jones is a 20-year physics professor at BYU who's penned an academic paper raising another hypothesis. Explosives pre-positioned in the building, damaged and ablaze from tower debris, but never hit by a plane.
Symmetrically, that doesn't topple over as you might expect from what we call the second law of thermodynamics. It comes straight down. This is the goal of pre-positioned explosives in a controlled demolition.
If explosives detonated like these, if they did, it begs the question, who set the explosives?
Sure. And I try not to go there too much because we have to answer the first question first, the scientific issue first. We need to consider all options for the collapse of these buildings. Let the chips fall where they may.
Jones says that models conducted in tests since 9/11 have not been able to duplicate what happened to the buildings. He is not saying that this is a proven theory. He says, in fact, that it's a hypothesis, but he wants a fresh, new, independent investigation. Mark, back to you.
Definitely something to think about, though, Brian.
Yeah,
all right.
sure is.
Thanks a lot.
The collapses of the Twin Towers and building number 7 had to have been examples of controlled demolition, brought about by thousands of explosives placed throughout each of the buildings. No foreign terrorist could have obtained the kind of access to the buildings this would have required. One reason for concluding that the 3 buildings were brought down by explosives is the very fact that they did collapse. High-rise steel-frame buildings have never, before or after 9/11, been caused to collapse by fire.
Made it outside. We made it about a block.
We made it at least 2 blocks, and we started running. Floor by floor, it started popping out.
It was if they had detonated.
Detonated.
They were planned to take down a building. Boom, 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 boom.
All the way down. I was watching it and running.
The buildings collapsed straight down and at virtually free fall speed, as in controlled demolitions. And then the rubble smoldered for months afterwards. With regard to the Twin Towers in particular, many people in the building said that they felt or heard explosions. Virtually all the concrete of these enormous structures was pulverized into very fine dust.
This was the South Tower. This was 104, 106 stories tall. This is what is left. Up there was the North Tower. And you look, and you see, and there's no concrete. There's very little concrete. All you see is aluminum and steel.
What happened to the concrete?
The concrete was pulverized. And I was down here Tuesday, and it was like you were on a foreign planet. All of Lower Manhattan, not just this site, from river to river, there was dust powdered 2-3 inches thick. The concrete was just pulverized.
Try this. Get a piece of concrete and drop it a little over 1,000 feet and see if it pulverizes into very fine dust. It won't happen. Much of this dust, along with steel and aluminum, was blown out horizontally from the buildings several hundred feet. Most of the steel beams and columns came down in sections about 30 feet long, conveniently ready to be loaded onto trucks. And pools of molten steel were found beneath the rubble.
This is how it's been since day one. Oh, it's unbelievable. And this is 6 weeks later, almost 6 weeks later. And as we get closer to the center of this, it gets hotter and hotter. It's probably 1,500 degrees. We've had some small windows into what we thought was the core at some point, and it looked like an oven. You know, it was just roaring inside. And it was just a bright reddish orange color.
These and even more effects point to the existence of very powerful, precisely placed explosives. A third thing supporting the theory of controlled demolitions is evidence of a deliberate cover-up. If the building's steel columns and beams had indeed been broken by explosives, an examination of the steel would have revealed this fact. However, although it is normally a federal offense to remove anything from a crime scene, the steel was quickly loaded onto trucks and put on ships headed for Asia to be melted down. I will mention one more example of the cover-up. Insofar as there is an official story as to why the towers collapsed, it is the pancake theory, according to which the floors above the destruction caused by the airplanes collapsed on the floor below, and then those floors collapsed on the floor below that, and then it pancaked all the way down. Now, even if this theory were remotely plausible, can you imagine it pancaking at free fall speed?
9:59, New York City, New York. The South Tower of the World Trade Center collapses to the ground in approximately 10 seconds. 29 minutes later, the North Tower follows suit, collapsing in approximately 10 seconds. Later that evening at 5:20, World Trade Center 7, a 47-story office building 300 feet away from the North Tower, suddenly collapses. The building's tenants included the CIA, Department of Defense, IRS, Secret Service, and Rudy Giuliani's emergency bunker. And the SEC was using it to store 3,000 to 4,000 files related to numerous Wall Street investigations. Although every single building surrounding Building 7 stood intact, it fell straight down into a convenient little pile in 6 seconds.
The other problem is what happened to the 47 massive steel columns that constituted the core of each of these twin towers. They were the weight-bearing structures of each tower. Those 47, even if the pancake theory were true, those 47 steel beams should have been sticking up at least several hundred feet into the air, just like the old phonographs, where sometimes the 78 records would collapse, but the spindle's still sticking up in the air. You should have had 47 spindles still sticking up in the air. Well, what did the 9/11 Commission report do about that problem? It avoided the problem incredibly by simply denying the existence of these columns. Even though those columns, I'm not making this up. These columns were the unique feature of these towers when they were first built. So, the Commission report, after saying falsely that most of the weight of each tower was borne by the steel columns in its exterior walls, this supposedly authoritative report said the interior core of the buildings was a hollow steel shaft in which elevators and stairwells were grouped. Such a desperate lie is a sure sign of a cover-up. In any case, when we look at all these features of the collapses, the idea that they could have been caused by the impact of the airplanes plus the resulting fires is ridiculous. This is even clearer with regard to building number 7, which wasn't hit by any airplane, and yet it came down about 5:30 that afternoon. Its collapse remains so impossible to explain, except as controlled demolition, that the 9/11 Commission report did not even mention it, as if the collapse of a 47-story building was not worthy of comment. And it only had fires on floors numbers 7 and 12 of 47 stories.
On February 14, 1975, a 3-alarm fire broke out between the 9th and 14th floors of the North Tower. According to the New York Times, the fire leads to intense scrutiny of the towers and eventually to a decision to install sprinklers. On May 4, 1988, a 62-story skyscraper in Los Angeles burned for 3 hours and spread over 4 floors. It did not collapse. On February 23, 1991, a 38-story skyscraper in Philadelphia, built in 1973, burned for more than 19 hours and spread over 8 floors. It did not collapse. On October 17, 2004, a 56-story skyscraper in Venezuela, built in 1976, burned for over 17 hours and spread over 26 floors, eventually reaching the roof. Guess what? It did not collapse. On February 12, 2005, the Windsor Building in Madrid, a 32-story tower framed in steel-reinforced concrete, burned for almost 24 hours, completely eradicating the upper 10 stories of the building. Although the top 10 floors of the building fell, the building itself did not collapse. And yet, on September 11, 2001, two 110-story skyscrapers, completed in 1973, burned for 56 and 103 minutes, respectively, over 4 floors, before collapsing completely to the ground. Galileo's law of falling bodies calculates the time in which an object will travel a certain distance in complete freefall. Distance, d, equals 16.8 times time in seconds squared. The South Tower was 1,362 feet tall. 1362 equals 16.08 times 84.7, or 9.2 seconds. The Twin Towers came down in nearly free-fall speed. Hyman Brown, civil engineering professor and the World Trade Center's construction manager. It was over-designed to withstand almost anything, including hurricanes, high winds, bombings, and an airplane hitting it. Kevin Ryan, Underwriters Laboratories, the company that certified the steel that was used in the World Trade Center, in a letter to Frank Gale of the National Institute of Standards and Technology. We know that the steel components were certified to ASTM E119. The time temperature curves for this standard required the samples to be exposed to temperatures around 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit for several hours, and as we all agree, the steel applied met those specifications. Additionally, I think we can all agree that even unfireproof steel will not melt until reaching red-hot temperatures of nearly 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Why Dr. Brown would imply that 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit would melt the high-grade steel used in those buildings makes no sense at all. This story just does not add up. If steel from those buildings did soften or melt, I'm sure we can all agree that this was certainly not due to jet fuel fires of any kind.
The cores themselves, basically, if you've seen diagrams of the building, there's a large central rectangle in each of the towers that contained 47 columns. And these columns basically were the primary structural support of the building. They were given the role of supporting the whole gravitational load of the building. Since they were so strong, it would have been reasonable to think that they would have withstood, at least to some extent, the collapse. But in fact, as we see after the buildings collapsed, there was basically only little stubs of these things standing up a floor or two above the ground level. The cores did not have much in them that would burn. The cores basically were dedicated to things like elevator shafts, utility shafts, stairways. So you have drywall material, you have a little bit of carpeting, you don't really have any inflammable material in the core itself. The core was specifically designed so it could not function as a chimney. They did not want, in the case of a fire, for the fire to be able to travel through the elevators or for air to come in through the elevators. So they were designed with what this architect, Aaron Swirsky, I believe it was, referred to as a hermetically sealed system. There were fire shutters that were designed to close off the core in the event of an event like this. And those, as far as we know, functioned properly, which means that there was a very limited amount of oxygen available. Institutes of Standards and Technology, NIST, rejected the idea that floor collapse was part of it. People on the scene, we've been told that the powder it represented most of the concrete, that the amount of intact macroscopic chunks of concrete on the scene were negligible, that basically everything was reduced to powder. And incidentally, we also know that other things besides concrete were reduced to powder. We know that contents of computers, exotic metals from computer chips, these sorts of things were also identified in the dust and in very small particles, generally on the order of less than 100 microns in diameter. So we have a real issue